Hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and I'm glad you could be here on this Future Friday. Thank you very much for being here. Now, for those who are unable to stick around, or maybe just really don't want to stick around forever, we do have our 10 then period of time at the beginning of this show. That's basically the first 10 minutes. Just allow me the opportunity to give to you the premise of what we were talking about, and then you could tune out. If you got to go to work, or you really just can't really devote a whole hour to our talk today. So on Future Friday, we get to talk about science fiction tabletop RPGs, and a armchair specialty of mine is transhumanism, and so we end up talking about a lot about Altered Carbon, Eclipse Phase, and The Expanse, and those type of science fiction tabletop RPGs. And I thought we would talk about CTAC. CTAC is an organization in the Altered Carbon universe. It stands for Colonial Tactical Assault Corps. And CTAC is this paramilitary organization within the Altered Carbon universe that it's like they are like the nameless, bug-eyed, monstrosity. They are a Black Ops corporate organization run by the United Nations Protectorate, which is kind of partially corporate, partially political. And this week, when we weren't talking about so much about science fiction, we were talking about the best of like fight it, flee from it, or finesse it confrontations in our tabletop RPG games. And I said, you know what? I think this organization kind of embodies all three. So allow me to convince you. All right. So in darn near every science fiction game, there is some kind of paramilitary organization. Doesn't need to be called or even related to CTAC, but I thought they do have some great imagery, and if you get to go to like ArtStation and get on the interwebs and just type in CTAC Altered Carbon, you're going to find a lot of imagery out there. A lot of it pretty cool. And one of the two things I think that really makes them a trope that really makes them stand out is one are the helmets. Okay, now we've seen in a lot of video games the face plateless helmet. Essentially, it's the helmet that when it is worn, it doesn't have a readily identifiable location for your mouth, your nose, your eyes. It is like a non-human, almost insectoid styled of imagery. And I really like that because it makes the person extremely non-human. Dead Man brings up the Colonial Marines from Aliens. They fit in there, but just follow me on this. Although the Colonial Marines from Aliens, if you listen to their conversation from the Aliens movie, it starts making you think like, wait a minute, how many bug hunts have they been on for them to think that this is like a common thing? Yeah, Tesla's like faceless mooks. It sure does make them faceless mooks because on one hand, the face plateless mask makes them non-human enough to be afraid of them, but it also means that you can kind of it allows you to literally treat them like faceless mooks. So yeah, Red Dice Diary says, so they're like good quality Star Wars stormtroopers, right? They are good quality. And I think this is the part of the CTAC that I think if we use this as a template for other like science fiction, I think it really works. So one thing is the idea that they are faceless mooks. Okay, you see 12 of them, and they all kind of look the same. They are like, of course, they're wearing dark colors, and they kind of blend into the shadows a little bit. They move with a precision, a tactical precision that makes them seem like a hive mind, and you can damn near pretty much dump them into any cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Star Wars. Pick your sci-fi element, and you could dump something, either them or something like them. You could change the name, of course. It's your world, and they really fit in. And I think the other part that makes them fearful a bit is the hive-minded, single-mindedness of how they operate. The communication between each of them, the the far more than than the crunchy stormtrooper idea, where I mean, they tactically work very well. They will attack the player characters in mass. They will use really good tactics. They are just as uh, they are equipped as well, or maybe even better than some of the player characters, because they're backed by the entire United Nations Protectorate and whatnot. But how do we how do we regulate the fight it, flee it, finesse it parameter? So in the fight it parameter, they very well can be the nameless mook, the minion, the all you need to do is roll it, and you don't even need to do 1 point of damage. In side note, in the role playing game, Feng Shui, you don't even bother rolling damage. If you roll to hit it, they go down. So if you want to run minions, I know there's the whole fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons give everything 1 hit point, but yeah, why even bother if they're going to be just nameless crunchies in the background, and it's just a way for your players to look like badasses? Just roll to hit them. If they hit them, they go down. You might even, if you really want to add a little bit of a conundrum in there, have them roll to hit, and they have to surpass a certain point. If they don't make the roll, they stun them, but they don't take them out. And then, of course, when they attack back, they still do the same amount of damage. So they're still a threat if they're not taken out. But you could just have them, black helicopters, dark vans, the whole 9 yards, aerodyne vehicles sliding down on ropes and whatnot. Pretty easy to just toss a bunch of minions in there. So the fight part of that is pretty easy to do. Red Dice Diary says, I have Dominion Troopers or D Troopers in my White Star game, which are pretty much the same thing. Faceless Mook warriors working for the Galactic Authority. And that's an easy one. Every single probably tabletop RPG out there setting has the faceless working for the Authority soldiers. Now let's get into where CTAC kind of separates itself from the masses. This is where the finesse and flee part comes into it. So, two things that really help with the CTAC is that they are a step above your local authority. So, in other words, let's talk television. So you have a television police procedural, and you have your beat cop, then you have your plainclothes detectives, and then you have your undercover officers, and you have your FBI agents, referring to things here in the States. So there's a level. And when CTAC is called in, it's like the local authorities are useless, bring in CTAC. And CTAC usually has a smaller group of highly trained individuals. And it's a visual and naming cue to alert the players that, oh, those nameless people you killed, no, but they're easy. This other group is coming in that's far better trained. And of course, doing a little bit of info dumping on your player characters. Maybe some of their connections are like, oh man, you guys made such noise. They're going to call in CTAC tactical units or elite soldiers or something, just to give across to your players that these people are dangerous. They are highly trained and whatnot. The second part of the finesse is that you can actually info dump as CTAC is attacking your player characters. Have them overhear some of their radio jargon. Maybe CTAC is alerting each of their members about details about the player characters, meaning like telling the player characters within game, in a meta sense, these people know who you are. They know your capabilities. They know your designations. They may even know some of your background and maybe some of your loved ones or your connections and go after them. So having them, it's the typical like moving silently, going around corners when the player characters are maybe hiding or trying to get in like sniper locations or whatever. And maybe the CTAC soldiers are communicating with each other where the players' characters just happen to overhear a conversation, conveniently, that even further gives them details that the CTAC team knows what they're doing and who they're going after. And lastly, one great way to make CTAC move up the threat ladder from nameless mook to a threat we need to run from is each time you insert your CTAC team, and again, it's just a placeholder name, make them just a little bit better. Give them something, or give them a skill, a capability, a piece of equipment, a modifier that they learned from the last interaction they had with the player characters when they confront the player characters again. Essentially, it is every time you fight them, they are getting better. They and within the altered carbon, and this applies to the Eclipse Phase universe, there are cortical stacks, and they are well trained, specifically trained to needle cast or ego cast their consciousness from one place to another. So when they arrive in these other worlds or other habitats and whatnot, they can quickly download their brains into a body, into a morph or a shell, into a sleeve, and then combine together. The group gets all their equipment. They're heavily financed, and they get to quell any rebellions. They are a mobile, highly elite police force. So if a player character uses a railgun last combat, have them have something that can confront that railgun. Maybe they're carrying alloy shields with them, or maybe they are using some kind of EMP device that shuts down the character's weapons, or they're using stealth technology in their suits, or they have some kind of sensor array that allows them to peer through walls so they can get the jump on the player characters, or they're using some kind of communication scrambling device or whatever. And every time they fight them, maybe they're just getting better and better and better. And the player characters, they keep learning from maybe we don't, they're not nameless mooks anymore. And I'm going to get to the last part in just a minute. I'm going to get into the chat and get back to the last part that really can cement it, how it just becomes, they're not just faceless, randomless, easy to kill soldiers, but something you can use to really ramp up the tension and start to weave in some background story into it. Red Dice Diary says, we had a similar thing in a recent session. The PCs took out 3 shadow troopers or elites and stole their armor. They used the helmet comms to listen in on the chatter. Great tip. Yeah. And as a side note to the listening in on the chatter, or player characters just happen to conveniently overhear conversations, CTAC can be used when you want your big bad to communicate with your player characters, but you don't want the big bad to stand in front of the player characters, because guarantee the player character is just going to put a bullet or laser blast right in the face of your big bad. Have the big bad, do the typical boastful talking to the player characters through your CTAC team, so that even if the player characters start popping them off one by one, you can still have the playful role play. You're not going to get away with this. You're not going to stop my plans. I know who you are. You need to return the MacGuffin back to me. You're never going to get the MacGuffin. There's no place you can hide in the galaxy. I will find whatever. Whatever intentions you have for your big bad to confront your player characters is a great way to do it. And it can be done through comms. It can be done through the typical hold up the wrist or palm and there's a hologram in it. It could be throwing the thumb drive to the player characters to let them listen to a message. It could be the player characters have found the secret frequency that's only between the CTAC members, and so they listen in on this thing, and in the background you can hear the big bad telling the group, I want them dead, I want them taken out, they need to return the MacGuffin to me now, that kind of thing. And of course the leader's like, yes sir, blah blah blah. They start moving around the hallways, and you have your your combat going on. Deadman says in Warhammer 40K Space Marines, typical stats for an average human would be around 20s for strength and endurance stats, while the average Space Marine has 50s. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with, in a meta sense, letting the player know that within game the character knows exactly what they're up against. So in other words, like what you're saying, Deadman, like if the average human has like a 20s stat in their strength and the average Space Marine has 50s, on a meta sense, you can say to your players, listen, the stats on these guys are something you don't want to trifle with, but in game, your character knows the background of them. You know, statistically, you are going to have a hard time, if not impossible time, fighting them. And give that information across to them. Go, you know what? Listen, I know you guys are Billy badasses, but I want to let you know, they've got +7s on all their capabilities. +7, whoa! Like, yeah, your character knows this. You've confronted them, or you've heard about them, or when you were in, the military academy, you heard about it. When you were on the black market, you've seen them crush other rebellions down or whatever. Like, just throw it into the game as knowledge, even though outside the game we're talking about numbers and such. It's just contextually giving across that information. And lastly, I will say that arranging some sort of personal connection. In Altered Carbon, there's a character, Jaeger, who has a connection to Takashi, our main protagonist in the story, and or you find out that he is a UN Protectorate CTAC agent, and in the second season they have like some kind of genetic modification from canines or lupines or something, and they're when you see them in action, they're operating like a bunch of rabid dogs. Like, they're working together like a pack of wolves. They're sliding weapons to each other. They're like grabbing weapons and explosives off of each other's waistbands and getting into these fights and like punching and kicking people and throwing them across the room to have somebody else catch them and choke them and break their limbs and shoot them in the head and whatnot. And just describing or showing these kind of tactics together, when your version of your CTAC team shows up and they are working as a unit, maybe they have some kind of benefit. Like, for every member, they get a bonus of like +5%. So if there's 6 of them, they get +30% on all of their skills and whatnot. And you describe how they're working together. When our player characters love to be Billy badasses, and cyber technology, wired reflexes, boosted reflexes, and combat drugs. And if you give that to the CTAC teams a little bit at a time, making them better and better, it's a good way to get the players to run. Lastly, because of the resources that they have, this is another way to ramp up the tension. Where, let's say, for example, in your world, they run around as 8-person teams. Well, one 8-person team, player characters are like no big deal. But 5 8-person teams, and then 15 8-person teams, and then whole squads and platoons and battalions and whatnot. It's the stormtrooper thing, right? Like a handful of stormtroopers, no big deal. But when they start marching in formation in groups of like 15 by 30 or whatever, then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, there's a good chance one of them is going to get off a good shot. We need to get the hell out of here. So having a running entrenched gunfight might not be the best thing. And again, getting this information across to the player characters. Maybe they overhear the CTAC team calling in for backup, and that backup may not be more soldiers. It might be those black helicopters, those dark vans, those Aerodynes with Gatling guns and missiles on it. It could be calling in using the UN Protectorate power to shut down the city in various ways, like shutting off water or power, or in a space habitat, slamming shut those blast doors to keep the players' characters in, and doing things like that, ramping up the tension. And of course, if the players overhear that they're going to shut the power down in the hab and alter the gravity, or drain the room of oxygen, or open the blast doors up to the vacuum of space, or anything like that, now you get to start the tension timer, right? It's going to happen in 2 rounds, and the players are like, 2 rounds, whoa. And one of your Billy Badass players is like, I'm going to keep on fighting, and the others are like, yeah, you're not going to survive vacuum. We need to get the hell out of here. And so CTAC could be the impetus for having other environmental things happen around the player characters. That's pretty darn dangerous. Lastly, are the political ramifications of dealing with CTAC. For example, in the Altered Carbon universe, CTAC isn't the first organization that existed. Back in the past, there were the envoys, and the envoys were the specially trained elite corps of soldiers that were supposed to be in lockstep with the UN Protectorate, but instead they turned against them. And so this is the second iteration of that protection force. And so the general public feels like, hey, if you're going to take up arms against CTAC, you're the villain, period. It's much like having in modern day, having a gunfight against the local authorities. Despite what you may personally feel, you having a gunfight against the local authorities makes you the bad guy, period. You're engaging in violence against a peacekeeping force, no matter what the population thinks of that peacekeeping force, much like the world of Star Wars. Yeah, the stormtroopers are wrong, but they're agents of authority. And we can argue the what their merits are against the normal population, but they're still agents of authority. So there is a political part of that too, where the players may not be able to call upon their contacts. A black marketeer is like, hey, listen, guys, I didn't realize you were going to get into an open public gunfight with them. I can't help you off planet, or I'm a little scared to do so. Those kind of things. Dead Man says, calling up to the warship to bombard the area with particle cannons like in BattleTech. Yeah. Yeah. There's an old anime that I really loved with where there was a very arrogant antagonist who would point his fingers at I think it was like Bubblegum Crisis or something, and he pointed his fingers at the main characters of the story, and just point his finger, and like dropping his finger, a bolt of laser blast energy would drop from like a satellite and blast the whole block into nothing, a big giant crater, and it's just like, yeah, you're dead, point, bang. Yeah. We're talking about shifting nameless mooks up to global threats and how to deal with that. So, there is a possibility of having to finesse, because we're talking about fight, flight, and finesse in science fiction, and the idea of like the nameless elite troops running around after the player characters. You can really start to create a rumor mill, a background of these elite soldiers that are running around in your sci-fi world. And of course, they don't need to be named CTAC, or you don't need to apply the exact history into like your Altered Carbon universe, exactly what CTAC is, because just according to the television show, it's clear that the UN Protectorate and these soldiers aren't necessarily on the same page, and that could either be politically, like maybe you might have an elite soldier that is like hardline by the book and doesn't succumb to like bribery and simple manipulations, or if one or more of these soldiers has a specific relationship with one or more of the player characters, maybe they start taking things personally, i.e., Jaeger and some of these other characters in the Altered Carbon universe. In the Altered Carbon universe, have a specific vendetta against one of our main characters, Takashi. So if you're one of your elite soldiers has a particular vendetta against one of the player characters, maybe even the elite soldiers start to get pulled in different directions where normally they're supposed to be quelling a rebellion, but now they're like, you know what, I'm gonna throw all caution to the wind because I want to take out, Billy Badass in your role playing group. Rickard says CTAC is the name of the real envoys in the TV series. Well, there is some there is some not controversy, but some faded kind of information about the relationship between the envoys and CTAC. I can tell you what I feel, but let me read a little bit of this. Comes from the Alter Carbon fandom page and says that. Let's see. Envoys are an ambiguous class of super soldiers. Alternatively, they were freedom fighters to some and terrorists to others who were created alongside the technology of the human race hundreds of years ago. They're able to use the cortical stack. They were led by Quelkes Falconer. I know you know this, but there's other people who don't, who claim to have been the creator of the stack technology. And disillusioned by their own invention, she gathered followers who turned against the United Nations Interstellar Protectorate. There's no specific timeline of events, but eventually Takashi and his sister Raylene were captured by them and eventually joined them. The modern perception of the envoys is that they are an extinct terrorist group who sought to undermine the power of the United Nations and were rightly killed off. The perception meets the official narrative that children are taught in schools with envoys being treated wholly as bad guys who were rightly killed for their crimes. Now, at some point, when the envoys broke off from the United Nations, they then created the Colonial Tactical Assault Corps. And so what I'm thinking is that whatever training the envoys had, the United Nations was like, we don't want to give them that much freedom. Maybe they were badasses, but we don't need badasses that are also independently minded and whatnot. So I think the recruiting method wasn't necessarily about freedom and capabilities. I think it was more or less, we'll take less capable people that are far more likely to be willing to toe the party line, I think is what I think. Red Dice Diary says, I think for finesse, if you know the elites are going to call in heavy support, you can cut off their communications. Somehow you may not have to deal with all the forces. Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, the player characters, despite the fact that they look like nameless crunchies and mooks and cannon fodder, maybe the player characters find some dark, manipulatable background of one or more of the agents themselves. So maybe there's like anything from owing favors to something dark in their past that will, when they call in for support, maybe that support doesn't come in, or it throws the normally lockstep group out of sorts because whether real or fictional, maybe one or more of the elite soldiers isn't as dedicated to the mission as everyone else thinks they are. A lie gets, bribery, blackmail, those kind of things are thrown out by the player characters. So instead of fighting them head on, they toss some rumor out there that one of the members of the CTAC's trying to create their own independent mercenary group or something like that. And the other members of the group are like, you're trying to leave us? You can't leave us. You can't quit me. We're a group. That's why the six of us all take showers together. We love each other, that kind of thing. Red Dice goes on to say, nothing is good going down when the phrase official narrative is used. Yeah. How many times have we seen that in like a special forces, like, okay, guys, okay, listen. And they start talking about how like they see all the dead bodies and the weapons and stuff. And it's like there's bullet holes and blaster fire and blood everywhere. And they're like, okay, here's what really happened. We're all on the same page, right? Okay. So this person pulled a weapon. You're going to be the hero. I'm going to call on the radio and pretend like we're in trouble. It's the whole 9 yards. And maybe the player characters and or the NPCs are forced to to cover up a crime or something like that. It'd be kind of cool. Vampanoy says, when your players get used to killing the faceless guys, you can give them a face to really throw off your party. Hell yeah. Give them a real name one of the nameless, and you can really get under their skin, especially if they see one of those nameless people like goes home and young girl runs up, daddy, and hugs them or whatever, and you're just like, oh no, those nameless, faceless people are real people. You know what I mean? Maybe make. I didn't even read that. Oh, Vampanoid, we're on the same page. Anyway, so Vampanoid says, maybe make it a kid they saved who they inspired to be a hero like them and joined CTAC. Ooh, or someone from their hometown who heard stories about them and wanted to go on adventures also. You know, in the Altered Carbon universe, hundreds of years have passed between when our protagonist goes down and gets spun up again, and there's nothing wrong with using. That's a great way to use time dilation in a good way, where, hey, a small kid looks up to one of the player characters, game session ends, we come back 12 years later after the player characters arrive somewhere, or go through time dilation, and while to player characters it's only been a week, but on the planetary surface it's been 12 years have passed, and now that 10-year-old's 22 years old and is like a fresh-faced recruit in one of these nameless armies or something, and the PCs are like blasting them like they're like bowling them down like bowling pins, and come to find out that one of them is this person who thought of them as a hero. That's awesome. I love that. Guys, steal that idea. Anyway, excuse me. Rickard says, is CTAC what the TV show calls the envoy from the books? Because the envoys are still UN soldiers and never had anything to do with Quell in the books. Well, that's you are absolutely correct. I think in the books they are more. They had time, and literarily, like we've always talked about, the reason why books are always better than shows universally is because in the books we've already cast all of our characters. When we read a book, it moves at the pace and speed we want. They have more time to. Most scripts are 100 to 200 pages, whereas a book is 600 plus pages long. So you have a lot more time to delve into things. And so, yeah, in the TV show, it's just the envoys are freedom fighters, and the CTAC works for the UN. There's not really, they don't go into what their relationship is and how one became the other. And yeah, they don't go into any of that in a TV show. And mainly because they really didn't have time to do that. Because when you're talking multiple books, it's like multiple scripts, and you gotta cut somewhere. And despite the fact of, like, I know you, Rickard, don't like it falls into the excellent premise, terrible execution region, but it'll always be that way whenever you read a book first. That's just a universality. Like Rickard says, and CTAC isn't a thing in the book, so not really sure what they are. I get it, but they are a thing. The show is the show, so they are a thing. And they are the elite soldiers. They are the ones who quell rebellions. They are the law enforcement arm of the UN Protectorate in the books. Now, it's very, when you need to, their tropes exist for a reason, because it's very easy to identify, and it's very easy to identify faceless individuals as the faceless individuals by not giving them a face. So yes, it would have been more dynamic to make the envoys like, well, there's just good envoys and bad envoys, but that doesn't make them faceless. And so it becomes easier to make people with the little, the face plateless helmets with the multiple glowing diodes on the front of them around the chin and forehead and across the nose and stuff. I don't know. I just think the artistically it looks cool, and in a visual medium, it's very difficult to bring that across in a when you're reading books or something like that. Red Dice Diary says that idea reminds me of the Become a Citizen video clips from the Stormtroopers movie. You know what? I I love the in-world recruiting, like posters and videos and stuff when they try to recruit you to the bad guy side, whether it's Star Wars or Starship Troopers really went deep into that. Do you want to become a citizen? I love those, Uncle Sam, like, we want you posters and stuff. There's something very, like, sadistically innocent about those recruitment videos and posters and things that I love. I love. Yeah, Deadman says 90 years between Takashi being killed in the prequels episode of Altered Carbon and being spun back up later. Then there's another 30-year gap between Altered Carbon season 1 and season 2. So there's a lot of time. Like, an NPC can go from best friend of player characters to highly trained elite soldier working against the player characters. You listen, if player characters can go through big changes in a couple of months gaming time, a 90-year difference and 30-year difference and whatnot, hell, just 1 year difference can mean night and day when the player characters aren't around and their NPCs are going through their own lives. Especially, heck, imagine the player characters mow down a bunch of nameless crunchies, some cannon fodder, and come to find out they're the kids of a now older individual. And especially if you've got cortical stacks, their age doesn't matter anymore when they can just be spun up into a younger body, when there's anti-agathics and things like that. Rickard's like, oh, okay, so the book envoys, cool. Now I'm on the same page. Yeah. It's in the books. There's still the envoys, but in the show, they just made a hard line distinction between the two. And gave them a different name and stuff like that. Yeah, I hear you. Rickard's like, pun not as interested, but welcomed all the same. Red Dice says, I can see I'm going to have to watch or read Altered Carbon. Sounds very interesting. The audio, I didn't read the audio book. The books are far more detailed and interesting, and dare I say, there's, I don't want to say shades of gray, but there's a lot more nuance in it because you're dealing with large time gaps, and with the introduction of cortical stacks into a book, you have personalities being switched between bodies. So you have personalities, the concept of a personality, and the concept of a physical body. And when you start to switch the two, your idea of what an ally, an enemy, an antagonist, a protagonist is starts to blend and shift, and your mind is trying to keep up with who is where and who's being copied. And there's in-world reasons for them to prevent certain things. Like in the world of Altered Carbon, you can have religious coding, and religious coding means that you legally cannot be spun back up again. And there's also a law against being copied, being zoxed, making two or more copies of your own personality to live freely in two or more biological bodies, and it's illegal in that world. Whereas in like Eclipse Phase, while it is illegal within the inner rim, the outer rim, and inner planets, the outer rim, out past the our own solar system's asteroid belt, it's pretty much open season for whatever you want to do. And this is a great way for you also as a dungeon master, storyteller, dungeon master, game master, to turn your version of CTAC into, I'm going to segue slightly. There's a writer, I've brought her up before, C.S. Friedman. She writes science fiction and fantasy novels, or at least had to. I was back in the late 80s and early 90s, I read a lot of her stuff. And I think she's still writing, but in her blog, she used to have a blog, and I was like, it's the first time. She was one of a number of writers where I would read some of their like articles and things. And one of her design elements was whenever she made a world, she would proceed to break that world. And so one of the things that player characters like to do in role-playing games is to break the world. Like, um, it's the Dungeons and Dragons version of, I'm going to take a portable hole, wrap it around an arrow, and then attach a bag of holding on the front of it, and then shoot it at something, so that when it impacts the arrow, the bag hits the enemy, the arrow goes into the bag, the arrow takes the portable hole into it, and then it annihilates everything in a big implosion, right? And it's like, well, maybe somebody's tried to do that already in the world. So I'm coming around in a big circle. Your CTAC may have already seen or is already engaged in the very thing the player characters have already thought of, or one or more of those things they've already thought of. Like, for example, what if you have a CTAC team that is literally like 8 individuals all moving in lockstep, and that are all the exact same personality, especially if that personality, that antagonist, is an enemy of one of the player characters. So maybe they put a bullet in the back of the head of one of their enemies, and then come to find out all the other 7 soldiers are wearing helmets, and they lift up the helmets to show who they are. They're exact copies of that individual, and they're clones or something. And the player character's like, ooh, damn, that means I don't know if I'll ever be able to really kill off my enemy or something. Or what's something else? The player characters love to spend their money on, like, exceptional cyberware and boosted reflexes. If you're doing something like Cyberpunk or Shadowrun or whatever, give that to the CTAC team. And in Shadowrun, magic exists alongside technology. Maybe the first time they fight the player characters, they have 0 magical defenses. The next time they come up, maybe one of the soldiers has magical abilities, or they have been enchanted by another individual to protect them, or maybe they start recruiting other members into the group, and now they have magical defenses, an astral projection Overwatch member, and they've got a rigger or a drone pilot or something with them, and moving them up the chain of, they're not faceless anymore. Now they've got a name, a face, a purpose. And of course, having combat that is asymmetrical, meaning like your version of a CTAC team starts going after the player character's resources, their investments, their loved ones, their connections, their communications, cutting them off from the rest of society, whether it is they are getting into the media of wherever they're at and accusing them of committing crimes that they haven't done. Maybe CTAC are the ones committing genocidal maneuvers, and they're just blaming the player characters, or they release to the public, or they dangle in front of the player characters that they have some information that could completely ruin their reputations if they only give up the MacGuffin, back down, leave the planet, give up the mission, etc. So that it might be asymmetrical that way. And then again, being able to call down an orbital bombardment, having the ability to have the legal authority to call orbital bombardment is pretty damn dangerous, even for a bunch of faceless soldiers. Deadman says Borderlands 3 has Captain Samuel Trant in the early game. Then in the later game, there's his older brother, General Daniel Trant. And with in these high technology games, cloning, cortical stacks spinning up and downloading personalities, genetic modification, there's so many ways you can play with it. As a matter of fact, within the Altered Carbon books, Raylene, Takashi's sister, once you find out, and there's actually an animated short that kind of deals with their relationship, where she shows up again. And despite the fact that you're following Takashi, who's a badass in all ways, shapes, come on. Takashi literally is an elite envoy, an elite CTAC soldier, according to the television show. He is a black marketeer who also wakes up in a body with all kinds of combat modifications. And it's like, yeah, of course he's the main character, because he has every hallmark of the badass noir detective style character. And then as the show goes on in the first season, you see a sister who you're like, wait a minute, she's actually kind of more of a badass than he is. And so it would be kind of cool for the players to walk around like, you know what? We're a bunch of Billy badasses with our guns and modifications, and come to find out that the player characters, hell, maybe even one or more members of one of these CTAC teams is a player character. Maybe given a different life choice. Maybe they were a fragment of a character's personality, and come to find out that this nameless person isn't so nameless anymore. Maybe a player character thought they were an orphan and they lost track of their loved ones, but come to find out that their younger sibling joined this group and whatnot. And they're out for revenge, and there's some kind of strange misunderstanding that's very difficult for them to absolve themselves from. So it could be any number of things. And I like the idea, like when Dead Man brings up the fact that you got this Captain Samuel, and then later on in the game there's an older brother. You can have relatives pop in and make this connection between everyone, especially if you have like you can kind of triangulate this a little bit. Like maybe there's a UN protectorate politician that wants the player characters to back down, doesn't really want them dead, but is trying to tell them like, listen, I've got enemies in politics that want you dead, and they're sending the CTAC teams after you. Please stop doing what you're doing. I can only hold them off so much till I've got to release them off the chain, and the player characters might have to have a time limit to perform a mission, because they know once they start orbital bombardments and dropping down from the sky and whatnot. Yeah, things might just be over. Mike Gould says, sounds similar to a plot line in a past Shadowrun campaign game, the Gemini Project. Shadowrunners were being cloned to be used as shock troopers. Hell yeah. In a fantasy setting, this could be applied to an undead phase. Elite troops are whites, so every target they kill becomes zombies who are then used as expendable shock troops. I love that. I played in a past cyberpunk campaign where the process of recording memories was being referred to as brain taping. If you had the forethought to have your body's cloned, a copy could rise. Yeah, that is literally, cortical stacks are literally the technology of walking around with a black box in your head that records, copies your entire neural net, your brain, and all of your memories. And then that cortical stack can be removed, and that information can be beamed and copied and inserted into yet another body. So it's not direct cloning, or rather, cloning is the physical manifestation of two biological bodies that are the same, but not necessarily their minds. So like Eclipse Phase and Altered Carbon don't have what the public would consider cloning. It's the mind is separate and it can be copied, and then the body is separate and it too can be copied. Altered Carbon doesn't really go into cloning too much unless you're really rich. Instead, you just if you're like arrested or you're spun back up, they just give you some other random body from some other person that probably couldn't pay their debts or was a criminal or something, which is pretty funny, because in Altered Carbon there's a scene where every year during the Day of the Dead they get the family gets the cortical stack of their copy of their grandmother and gets spun up in a random body, and this dude's got like a big beard, he's got all these like biker tats and stuff, and facial piercings and everything, and it's like it is supposed to be grandma. It's just like, it's so hilarious, it's funny, but it's cool. I just love that whole scene. It's played for laughs, of course, but it is emblematic of a society that has cortical stacks and poor people. So yeah. Mike Gould says, ooh, using Babylon 5 as an example, the Shadows were using parasitic aliens that were implanted into a victim to control them. They could only have mental freedom if they were drunk. Ooh, that would be interesting if your version of an elite force of like CTAC teams are only personalities, but the physical embodiment of them are random citizens, so that the CTAC teams are basically unplugged, downloaded into random or not so random innocent people in various planetary surfaces. and then they just go and get equipment. So if the player characters kill the police forces, they're killing innocent people because they're only downloading. They're being ridden by they're being there's passengers in their brains who are elite fighting forces, but the bodies themselves are. There is a plausible deniability of although you know your prototypical soccer mom running around with battle armor might look a little bit funny, but if a bullet goes in her head by one of the player characters, they could very easily say, see how bad they are," which is that's pretty nasty. But it would be kind of cool to have something like that where the police force literally, much like the Agent Smiths in the Matrix, take over the bodies of innocent people. So every time an Agent Smith is killed, they turn back into the innocent individual that they were, which is kind of a shame. Rickard says, if you can switch shells multiple times, what would you clone? Well, what would you clone? I don't know. Well, this brings up, we'll get into that. I want to get you a second comment. Bodies become nothing more than a piece of clothing at that point. I think, while not as important in the Altered Carbon television show, but it does come up both in the gaming statistics. Okay, body dysmorphia is a real thing when it comes to when your brain wakes up in a body that isn't yours. And especially in eclipse phase where you have synthetic bodies that may not even be humanoid anymore, and there are actually biological bodies that aren't humanoid anymore. You can be driven insane by waking up in a body that is not the same gender, not the same racial type, not the same age, et cetera, et cetera. So the CTAC and envoys, and of course our main characters, Takashi and more, that are re-sleeved into different bodies, have the ability to acclimate themselves to a new body very easily. So cloning yourself actually is a psychological protection. It may not give you a physical benefit, meaning like if I wouldn't want to clone myself because I'm short and chubby and I've got problems. I've got various physical problems going on, old man problems. Prostate exam, anyone? That that are happening that I wouldn't want to be in my own body, but psychologically, maybe I can only fit into my own body. You know what I mean? So there is a reason for it. It just depends on like training, and maybe there's some other unnameable body switching thing that people have. Maybe we don't know who has body dysmorphia until it actually happens. So yeah, and also they can keep your real biological body on ice and use that as a dangling thread. Maybe you want to get back to your biological body, or you wake up in a body, i.e., Altered Carbon, the first season. Our main character Takashi wakes up in someone else's body and teams up with a police officer, a detective, who was in love with the body he was in, but not necessarily the personality, right? And you get that dichotomy, maybe there's someone your character had a love affair with, and then come to find out that one of these CTAC agents is inside of it. In season 2, we see them try to use that to break our main characters. And so, yeah, that can be used when you start talking about switching bodies and minds and stuff. I like that. Mike Gould says, right, the CTAC is actually a parasitic download, like the agents from the Matrix. You could have a wireless CTAC who would then know where weapon caches would be hidden. Again, switching back to fantasy, your CTAC are ghosts. They possess victims to keep security. An empire of the dead. As a matter of fact, that'd be very cool how, like, you could have even a... I think in a fantasy setting, what's the big thing in fantasy, right? Making a good necromancer. It's like that's like number 6 or 7 down the list of arguments people have in gaming, much like the argument between armor class, hit points, alignment, firearms, but good necromancers is another fight that people have in fantasy gaming, and this could be a society where ghosts and the undead are revered, and maybe even like mummies and that kind of thing. I'm thinking, I don't know why I'm thinking Egyptological, fantasy Egyptological. It could be a thing where people in this place understand that to defend the city, ghosts will possess my body and I will become their agent. And they're like, yeah, of course I will. They're my ancestors. Why would I say no? I, my ancestors are going to use me? Hells yes. You know, and that would be awesome, especially if the player characters are like causing a bunch of trouble and stuff. Rickard, you all right? Mm-mm-mm. Anyway, Vampanoy says, if you just want to sow trust and your players intercepted their comms, just give them your players a piece of paper and collect them back. Let them hear in comms that their agent has successfully been implanted in the group. You know what? If you're really good at, okay, because this was a conversation I had with someone about playing online. So follow me on this one. If you're doing like meetups, Zoom chat, whatever, and you're able to individually, as the game master, speak to each player, like you can get on a chat and just send them a private message, and then you send each player a private message that you overhear that an agent has been inserted into the group. So now all the players are suspicious of everybody else. I love it. I love that. There is a doppelganger in your group. There is a secret agent. We've implanted an agent. They are I don't know. They are not only implanted, but they have been hidden into the somehow like what's the term, like their personality has to be unzipped at the proper moment, or the certain code phrase or something like that. So you could even insert a secret agent that isn't awake yet, like a zipped file waiting for them to be activated. Yes. Ushim, hello there. Suduki One, how are you? Thank you very much for popping in. Yeah, an activated agent, and then one or more of the player characters. And listen, if you've got a player who really loves to be if you have a player that loves to be a turncoat, like, oh, I've got a secret no one else has, that's a great way to just throw them a bone. A sleeper agent that doesn't even know they're a sleeper agent. Uh, Oh man, Usham says, Winter Soldier is big right now. Hell yeah, hell yeah. And if you've got a player that's like, they've got ADD when it comes to making a character, like, yeah, you know what, I made a high tech guy, but now I want to make a sniper. No, I want to make an assassin or something. Throw him a bone and go, you know what? Guess what? Your character isn't your character anymore. That'd be sweet. Although it could all be a lie, just to sow discord amongst all the player characters. I don't know how long. Vampanoid's like, I'm not a Cylon, you are. No, I'm not, you are. You stupid head, I'm not, you are. They're all Cylons. Oh man. Man, Mike Gould says, imagine an empire where the citizens exist only in a virtual sense. They are literally wireless programs. That would be your Empire of the Dead in a sci-fi setting. Parasitic downloads attack. That actually exists in somewhat in Eclipse Phase, where there are, I believe it's on, is it on, not Titan. There's a hab floating around Jupiter where everyone lives in a virtual, they're all infomorphs. They are all information downloads, and periodically agents of them come out into the physical world to operate, but their entire society is digital information, and I like that. Ushim says, it's like a coming of age ceremony where you upload to the cloud. Physical form is so juvenile. Yeah, hey, transhumanism, yep, Like, oh, you're just, why are you still running around in your meat? Other people deserve to run around in your meat, not just you. Yeah, you're being selfish. Rickard says, what's that necromancer meme? PC1, I want to avenge my brother's death. PC2, you have my axe. PC3, and my bow. Necromancer PC, and your brother. Yeah, no one ever. Everyone likes to play the necromancer, but no one wants to apologize for running around with the undead bodies of like grandmas and little kids and stuff. Dead Man says it's called Afrique, a processor locus in the Uranus orbit. Ooh, I forgot. Is it out in Uranus? I forgot that. I thought it was around Jupiter. But yeah, there is a digital world where everybody lives there in the cloud, basically. Isn't there a famous talking meat classic sci-fi story? Oh yeah, they're made they're made out of meat. Yep. Terry Bison, 1981. Yeah, they're all made out of meat. Why are they made out of meat? That's weird. I love that. I love that story. Let me see if I can find. You guys type it into the chat. Tesla or Dead Man, so somebody can find that story. They're made out of meat. Terry Bison. My cortical stack, you've got it. See, that's the great thing. That's one of the reasons why I'm an armchair enthusiast for transhumanism. Just because I think this is just another avenue to tell some really funny, great stories. Thank you very much there. Yep. Yeah, there it is, made out of meat. Man, I'll put it in here. That's hilarious. Anyway, we've kind of come to the end here, talking about not so much, but talking about CTAC and the whole idea of having these elite troops, these nameless soldiers and whatnot. And listen, we got to have some nameless soldiers out there. And Star Wars really embraced that with the Stormtrooper, but sometimes I think we we can back ourselves into a corner by only having that, and the player characters being the ones that are always the badasses, and maybe we just need to ramp up the tension a little bit. And so I like this three-pronged element of fight it, flee it, finesse it, where there's an opportunity to fight, to have the players just be like, to open up a can of whoop ass and just blast away all your bad guys. But there's sometimes when we really want to ramp the tension up for have them to run from an encounter. And that running from the encounter can just be ramping up the tension. The enemies know who they are, what they're about. They come prepared. Their numbers start to grow. Their ability to draw on greater resources, or orbital bombardments are a great way to put a period into who's got the bigger one, you know, and even writing in some story elements where maybe in the beginning they are nameless, but eventually they start recruiting individuals or an NPC that's important to one of the player characters, or hell, maybe one of your old player characters that retired their character becomes a leader or member of one of these faceless groups, and now there's a name attached to it. They start finding out some more of the background, and that's where you get to not just running from a fight, but finessing a confrontation. Like, yeah, we can take them out, but maybe we don't want to. We could be blamed for their crimes. We could owe them some kind of debt, or we might, we need to be on a stealth mission. We really can't have an open gun battle with these individuals. So, yeah, Mike Gould says the Borg and Star Trek brought this concept to life as well. Matter of fact, they sure did. They were nameless crunchies. They were a force you need to run from. They were a society that you needed to finesse to talk them down from, as to the point where a crew member from the Borg ended up coming into the storyline, right? A little bit of all three with the Borg, so it was Star Trek. So yeah, absolutely. Lastly, Rickard says, nameless soldiers with a photo of their little daughter in their pocket for the players to find when they loot. Ooh, we need we're going to end it on that one because I love that idea. I love, I absolutely love the idea that the players feel like they have, you know, because when you have nameless villains, right? There's no. Do we really think about our morals and ethics and whatnot in that situation? No, not at all. We're just like, let's just blow them away. Bang, 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 bang. And when the dead soldier falls down in slow motion and falls over and they start to loot the bodies, and you see a little girl sitting there, sitting on mommy or daddy's lap or something. You see the smiling family, and you got to have the blood splatter. You always have to have like the soldiers like the crumpled picture is in their hand, and you see like the blood running down the corner of the page, the photograph. It's always got to be an older, slightly aged photograph with like crinkles around the edges and whatnot. Oh, hells yes. Sitting in a pool of blood. Yeah, I love it. And anyway, guys, you guys have a great one on this Future Friday. I think our thing for next week is going to be, strangely enough, nothing. I think next week I'd like to talk about like how to. You guys know that part of me going live Monday through Friday is to exercise the muscle of creativity. So what if we aren't creative? What if I've done this plenty of times. I think you've seen it before, where I started a show and I had zero idea what we're going to talk about. So how do we practice it, and what process do I go through, and what can we learn from that? So maybe next week we'll probably just do nothing. So anyway, guys, I'll see you later. Have a great one. I got to get out of here. You guys have a great one. I will see you later. Bye. And by the way, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it.